Welcome to chapter 34 of the book of Isaiah. A lot in this chapter. I couldn't believe all the things when I saw them that relate to the things that are mentioned in the New Testament. A lot to go through. It begins, lead forward ethne, nations, and acousate, archontes. And here, acoustics, derivatives, archon, rulers. Acousato, igi, here, O earth, and the ones living in it. So this is all to the people and to the world. Ecumeni, the inhabitable world, is the ecumeni. The gi is the earth itself. So it's very specific here. Nations, the whole world, and then the inhabitable world. Ke o leos o enafti, and the leos is people in it. So there you are. Now, what more can this be than the future? All the nations, and it's not anything specific at the beginning right here, but it does get specific later. So this is the beginning of it. It's getting the attention of us, everybody. For the rage of the Lord is upon epi pantata ethne, upon all the nations. It's not just any one. And his anger, orgi, epi, ton arithmon of ton. Orgi, anger, upon arithmon, a number. We get arithmetic from that. His anger is upon their number. To destroy them and to deliver them up unto slaughter. We see the same thing in Revelation 19:15 that Isaiah saw here 700 years or so before John saw a similar thing and wrote about it in the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse. And it says in 19:15 of the Apocalypse, and from out of his mouth goes forth a sharp, double-edged broadsword, that with it he should strike the nations. And he shall tend them with a rod of iron, and he treads the wine vat of the wine of the rage of the wrath of God Almighty. The rage and the wrath of God Almighty is being poured out, the sharp double-edged sword from Jesus, basically. When he returns, there's going to be a slaughter. And the ones slain, now you can add this to your English derivatives book, travmatie, we have trauma, comes from that. The ones slain of theirs shall be tossed forth, and the necri, the dead ones, and the scent of them, osmine, osmatic is something that smells, the scent of them shall ascend, and the mountains shall be rained upon, and I scratch that up from their blood. From the blood, it's going to be all, it's going to be a bloodshed, a terrible bloodshed. The day of slaughter that it mentions right up here is mentioned in James 5:5. It says, you indulged upon the earth and lived extravagantly. You maintained your hearts as in a day of slaughter. And this is the unbelievers, the lawless. They've indulged, they've lived extravagantly, and they're maintained this until the day of the slaughter, that they will be slaughtered. And all the powers of the heavens shall melt away. Dynamis, power, dynamite comes from that. Uranon, the heavens, shall melt away. And in 2 Peter 3:11 confirms this and says, these things then all being loosed. What kind of persons must you be in holy behavior and piety, expecting and hastening the arrival of the day of God, by which the heavens being set on fire shall be loosed, and the elements being destroyed by fire shall melt away. 2 Peter 3:11 and 12. And the heaven shall coil up as a vivlion, as a scroll. It mentions that in Revelation 6:14. And the heaven had been separated as a scroll being rolled, and every mountain and island were shaken from out of their places. And then, and all the stars shall fall as Phila. Astra, astronomy comes from that. Phila, phylum, leaves. And all the stars shall fall as leaves fall from out of a grapevine, and as leaves fall from a fig tree. And that again, another place is in Revelation 6:13. It says, and the stars of the heaven fell unto the earth as a fig tree cast its immature figs, being shaken by a great wind. Now, it gets a little more specific. For my sword was intoxicated in to urano, in the heaven. It was intoxicated. That means that it's a figure of speech. A sword cannot be intoxicated. It can't get drunk. But the one that's holding it is acting wildly. Basically, it's what it's talking about here, I believe. Behold, it shall go down upon Idumean. I have Edom. It's actually Idumea. You can change that to Idumea if you would like, which is a country that's south of the Dead Sea on the eastern side of the Jordan, the Dead Sea and south, and upon the people of the destruction with judgment. The sword of the Lord was filled of blood, thickened from the fat of lambs and from the fat of he-goats and rams. For a sacrifice to God is in Bosor, and a great slaughter in Edom. And we'll go to a map, and we'll see right over here is Edom. Here is Jerusalem, and Israel comes down. And here, now it's all goes down. It's like something like that. There's a line going across here. Edom is over here in what is today Jordan, and Basra is right up in here someplace. This is what, and this is fairly close to the Dead Sea. This is where Sennacherib came around to attack here when Isaiah's prophesying, to attack King Hezekiah right in this area here, and it was a slaughter. It was right there, right by the Dead Sea. And Hezekiah came down from Jerusalem through this area to see, and all these dead were laying down here. So all this is happening, and it's mentioning it again here, which is very interesting. Now, it mentions things in the Bible here. It says for the sword of the Lord. It mentions the sword of the Lord. And the sword of the Lord was filled with blood, thickened from the fat of lambs and from the fat of he-goats and rams. And we read about that in Jeremiah 12:12. It says, upon every mountain pass in the wilderness, which is where they were on that map, came the ones causing misery. For the sword of the Lord shall devour from one tip of the land unto the other tip of the land. There is not peace to all flesh. So this sounds like to all flesh. It sounds like it's a worldwide condition, and Jeremiah is bringing out. And then he brings out in 47:6, he says, how long will you smite, sword of the Lord? So he makes sword of the Lord. He calls it by name in Jeremiah 47:6. Then for a sacrifice to God is in Bosor, and we show that on that map. And it says in Genesis 36:33 about these people in Bosor. And these were the kings reigning in the land of Edom, before the reigning of a king in Israel. And Balak, son of Beor, reigned, in the name of his city Dinhabah. And Balak died, and Jobab reigned instead of him, son of Zerah, from out of Bosoras, which is still Bosor. Bosor is also called Beor, which Balaam was from, and Basra, all the same, basically the same place, just different spellings. And then in Isaiah 63:1, it has that interesting place. When we get there, we'll go through that more. And it says, who is this coming from out of Edom with garments dyed red from out of Basra or Bosor? And so when we get to 63, we'll find out who that is. And then in Jeremiah 48:24, it says there's a judgment will be on Bosor. And finally in 2 Peter 2:15, it says, leaving behind the straight way, they wandered, following after the way of Balaam, the son of Bosor, who loved the wage of unrighteousness. So this Balaam and Balak, and Balaam was hired by Balak to curse Israel, and he wanted the money, and he came, but instead he blessed them, and you can read all about that. It's in the book of, I'm not sure if it's where it's at in Exodus, but anyway, it's there when they were going through the wilderness. In verse 7, and the stout men shall be cast down with them, and the rams and the bulls, and the earth will be intoxicated from the blood, even their embankment. And an embankment is a mound of dirt. A lot of times it has to do with either a grave, or it has to do with a mound that they worshipped false idols and so forth. And they shall be filled up of their fat. So this shall be filled up. What does it mean? The sacrifice that's in Bosor that it mentioned up here. That's for the sacrifice to God is in Bosor, in a great slaughter in Edom. And the stout men shall be in the rams of the bulls, and the earth will be filled up from the blood, even your embankment, there being the ones that sacrifice. In verse 8, for it is a day of judgment of the Lord. It mentions that in 2 Peter 2:9. But the Lord knows to rescue the pious from out of tests, and the unrighteous to keep for a day of judgment being punished. So it mentions that in 2 Peter, and again in 3:7. But the present heavens and the earth in the same word are treasured up for fire, being kept for a day of judgment and destruction of impious men. So here we see it, for it is a day of judgment of the Lord. But here it says, in a year of recompense, of judgment of Zion. Generally, in the Bible, it talks about a day of recompense, but here it has actually a year of recompense. In Hosea 9:7, it says, the days of recompense have come. The days of your recompense have come. And Israel shall be afflicted as if the prophet moved out of place, a man carried by the wind. Because of the multitude of your iniquities, your frenzy was multiplied. So here it's against Zion. It's very specific. It's against Zion, Jerusalem. And it's very interesting where this will lead us. In verse 9, and her ravines shall be turned into pitch. And pitch is like tar. They used it to smear it to make bricks, and they used it to cover up the ark that they put baby Moses in so it would float and wouldn't sink. And they used pitch in other ways, and in her land into sulfur in this land. So this pitch in this land has to do with, I believe, well, it says here, and her land will be in burning pitch night and day. It goes down into 10. So now where do we see this pitch? And it says, and the salty valley had wells of tar, and the king of Sodom fled, and the king of Gomorrah, and they fell in there, and the ones being left behind fled into the mountainous area. And that's in the book of Genesis. Don't have the chapter and verse. I forgot to write them down. Sorry. Now, it says that this was by the salty sea, because Strabo, the geographer, if I have these little books that I mentioned from the Loeb Library of Harvard, I'll read what Strabo, as he was going through that area, has to say. He says, starts off with the wrong name, but Lake Cerbonus, but then it says that he obviously got it confused with the name for the Dead Sea, is large. So the Dead Sea is large. In fact, some state that it is 1,000 stadia in circuit. However, it extends parallel to the coast to a length of slightly more than 200 stadia, is deep to the very shore, and has water so very heavy that there is no use for divers. And any person who walks into it and proceeds no further than up to his navel is immediately raised afloat. It is full of asphalt, and this is what this pitch is. The asphalt is blown to the surface at irregular intervals from the midst of the deep, and with it rise bubbles, as though the water were boiling. And the surface of the lake, being convex, presents the appearance of a hill. With the asphalt there arises also much soot, which, though smoky, is imperceptible to the eye, and it tarnishes copper and silver and anything that glistens, even gold, and probably the sulfur. And when their vessels are becoming tarnished, the people who live round the lake know that the asphalt is beginning to rise, and they prepare to collect it by means of rafts made of reed. The asphalt is a cloud of earth which at first is liquefied by heat and is blown up to the surface and spreads out, and then again by reasons of the cold water, the kind of water the lake in question has, it changes to a firm solidified substance and therefore requires cutting and chopping, and then it floats because of the nature of the water, owing to which, as I was saying, there is no use for divers, and no person who walks into it can immerse himself either, but is raised afloat. They reach the asphalt on rafts and chop it and carry off as much as each can. And then it mentions later about cities in that region, of which Sodom was the metropolis, but that a circuit of about 60 stadia of that city escaped unharmed, and that by reasons of earthquakes and of eruptions of fire and of hot waters contained asphalts and sulfur. The lake burst its bounds, and rocks were enveloped with fire, and as for the cities, some were swallowed up and others were abandoned by such as were able to escape. So all this time of Christ was written about that area, and here 750 years before Strabo, or 700 years, he mentions all of this, and it goes into detail on what this is all about in that area. So this area is what is going to be affected night and day. And it says, and it shall not be extinguished into the eon of time. So what happens here is going to be into the eon of time. Now, this burning with the pitch and the sulfur is mentioned in Revelation 21:8. It says, their part is in the lake burning with fire and sulfur, and the lawless, which is the second death. And this is in Revelation 21:8. And then Jesus says in Mark 9:43-48, I'll just read one section here, to go forth into Gehenna. It's better to lose a leg, or an arm he's talking about, or an eye, than to go forth into Gehenna, into the inextinguishable fire. Right in here is not going to be extinguished, where their worm does not come to an end, and the fire is not extinguished. Now, if anybody thinks that they don't like the word eternal or everlasting, to me they have a hard time, because it's obvious in the Bible that this is what it's talking about, and Jesus is talking about. And her smoke shall ascend upward. And we have that in Revelation 18:9. And the kings of the earth shall weep whenever they should see what the smoke of her. What's her they're talking about? Babylon. They're saying Jerusalem, basically, because this is what it's talking about. Her is Jerusalem, burning fire. Unto her, so her here, in here, this whole place is Zion. It's about Jerusalem. So as I've been saying all along, this just goes to show that Babylon is Jerusalem because of this burning fire forever. And the king saw it, and they're weeping. In verse Revelation 18, 17, and 18, it says, For in 1 hour was made desolate so great a wealth, and every navigator and all upon the boat sailing, and seamen, as many as worked the sea, stood from far off and cried out, seeing the smoke of her burning fire, saying, What is likened to the great city, Jerusalem? And then Zion, it says that here. A bird confirms John, Revelation. Birds, Arnia, ornithology, study of birds, and hedgehogs and ibises. You can add that to the English derivative book. It's a transliteration. And crows shall dwell in her. And a surveying line shall be put upon, a surveying line of desolation shall be put upon her, Zion. What is it talking about here? Well, we go here, the man with the cord measure that is given. And it says, And I lifted my eyes and beheld, this is in Zechariah 2, 1-5. And I lifted my eyes and behold a man, and in his hand was a measuring line of a surveyor, the same thing. And I said to him, Where do you go? And he said to me, To measure out Jerusalem, and see how great the width of it is, and how great is the length. And behold, the angel speaking with me stopped, and another angel went forth to meet with him. And he said to him, Run and speak to that young man, saying, Fruitfully shall Jerusalem be inhabited of a multitude of men and of cattle in the midst of her. And I will be to her, says the Lord, a wall of fire round about, and I will be for glory in the midst of her. But now, this is a future Jerusalem that it's talking about. And putting the surveying line, and then so it's going to be made desolate. Now, where we see this desolation mentioned, it says in Daniel 8:13, For how long shall the vision stand? The taking away the sacrifice. This all has to do with Jerusalem. And the granting the sin of desolation in the holy place, and the force shall be trampled upon. So this future, with the beast, the temple will be rebuilt. I believe Israel will be attacked. Israel is going to defeat the nations. The Muslim nations will cease to exist. Islam will cease to exist, just as the Soviet Union ceased to exist almost overnight when they're finally defeated in the Battle of Armageddon. And then Israel will rule the world. It'll build the temple. And then after that, at a time, then the beast will appear, Satan incarnate, rule from there, and the world will then be destroyed through him and the desolation that he causes. And it says, For how long shall this vision last? The taking away the sacrifice, and the granting the sin of desolation, and the holy place and the force shall be trampled upon. In 9:27, And he shall strengthen covenant with many for 1 period of 7s, and that's the beast. And in the half of the period of 7 shall be lifted away the sacrifice and libation offering, which was in the temple that was going to be rebuilt. And upon the temple an abomination of the desolations will be. And unto the completion of time, completion shall be given unto the desolations. So it's not going... It's going to be for a long time. And then it continues, Her rulers will not be. So at the end of the rulers of Israel and her kings and her great men will be for destruction. Israel will be destroyed. And the thorny woods shall grow in their cities, Israel, and also in her fortresses. And they will be properties of Syrenon. That's a siren. It's a transliteration. You can add that to the English derivatives book. And a courtyard of ostriches. That's just going to be open, just animals running around. And demons shall meet with satyrs, daemonia, onokentavris, some type of they call it satyrs, but it's an animal that has one horn. It's mentioned in Strabo mentions onokentavris, so it's not only satyrs, but it's an animal. And they shall yell another to the other, and satyrs shall rest there, for they found for themselves a place of rest. The hedgehog shall nest there, and the earth preserved her children with safety. Now, there's actually the children here. I suppose this is after the tribulation period, a time of desolation, but there are some people that will be going through and surviving. There stags meet together and beheld the faces of one another. They go by in number. This is the desolation being described. And not one of them perished. The other did not seek the other, for the Lord gave charge to them, and his Spirit gathered them. So things are happening, changing on the earth. It's no longer being a place where animals are killing each other, man is killing each other, destruction. It's starting to be rebuilt by God, where the animals are living together. And he shall cast lots for them. Clerus, a cleric comes from that, where a man that's a cleric is cast from by casting lots for like a priest or so forth. And his hand divided out parts to them to graze. Into the eon of time, aeona chronon, you shall inherit, for generations of generations shall rest upon it, 1,000-year reign, is the way I see it all. Very interesting chapter. Chapter 35 is going to be interesting too. The way, we know the way, I mentioned it before, the early church was called the Way. So we'll find out about the way in chapter 35 in our next video, and hope you'll join us, and God bless.